Gerald Ford was really my favorite president. He was so comfortable around reporters. This was because, unlike a lot of people who come to the presidency, he had been a Republican leader in the House of Representatives, and he dealt with reporters every day. He didn't have close friends in the press like, say, John Kennedy did, but he was used to reporters. They didn't frighten him. They didn't make him feel uncomfortable, and he was just as honest and open as the day is long. We had more fun with him. I mean, in those days, you could actually tease presidents a little bit, and I had, many things that I disagreed with him about, but just on a personal basis, he treated us very, very nicely. One of my fondest memories is Walter Cronkite and Eric Sevareid and I were going to interview him one night for a primetime broadcast, and the guy at UPI was named Dick Growald, and he had asked me about it, and I said, my mother told me to be respectful. And I said, well, Mother, I'm always respectful to the president. And she said, yes, no, I meant be respectful to Mr. Cronkite and Mr. Sevareid. Well, he had written a little piece that got on the UPI wire, and President Ford saw that on the wire. And after the interview, he wrote my mother a letter. Didn't tell me about it, wrote her a letter and said, Dear Mrs. Schieffer, I want you to know that your son was not only respectful to me, he was also respectful to Walter Cronkite and Eric Sevareid. You should be proud, or something like that. He was just the kind of guy that did things like that. And we all really became very fond of him, quite frankly. And the other part is, early on, I mean, he had really made us all furious when he pardoned Nixon. I mean, I was just felt personally offended when he did that. But as the years passed, I and a lot of other reporters came to believe that he had done the right thing. I think, on balance, that his pardon of Nixon may have been one of the most important things that any president did in the last half of the 20th century, because when we got into the Clinton administration and we saw, the turn that the impeachment debate took and how long that took, the idea that American president in the dock being charged with a crime like that, just the amount of time it would have taken for the legal process to unfold, I mean, the country would have come to a complete stop. I think Ford was right about that. To pardon Nixon now, I think he understood that when he did that, it would probably cost him the presidency if he tried to run. He told me later he did think it cost him the presidency, that's what did it. But it was a great act of political courage, and I really admire him now in retrospect for doing it, although I thought at the time it was absolutely wrong. We all fell in love with Ford, because it had been so awful at the White House for so long and so mean. I remember the day that Nixon left the White House, and I'd been sent out to Andrews Air Force Base to see him off. I saw him wave from Air Force One for the last time as president, and then halfway to California, Gerald Ford became president, because the idea was at noon of that day his resignation would be effective. So I did not get to see Ford being sworn in and all of that, but I got there in time to see him introduce his new press secretary, who was a guy named Jerry Horst, who was a friend of mine. He was a little guy, Jerry was, and he is. And when Ford brought him into the press room, he said, I want you to meet the man's going to be the new press secretary. He's one of your own, Jerry Horst. And Peter Lisagor, who worked for the Chicago paper, said, hold him up so we can all see him, And the room just erupted into laughter, including from President Ford. It was the first time anybody had laughed in that press room in 2 years. It was just like after a hard rain, it finally stops and everything's different. That's the way it was in that press room. It had been such a difficult time while Nixon was president. And then everything just changed overnight. So, we all did stories about how he made his own breakfast, President Ford, and how he went swimming every day. And then, of course, when he pardoned Nixon, it just, shocked everybody. And so then we had a hard time with that. But I think before he left office, we all came to really admire him, even though at that time I wasn't ready to forgive him for pardoning Nixon.